Welcome to Interfaithing,
a podcast for and about Jewish and Christian interfaith families,
where we explore the question why families can embrace two faiths under one roof.
I'm Ari, the son of a rabbi,
with a degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary.
I'm Anna, the daughter of a minister with a degree from the Union Theological Seminary. We were co-teachers together at the Interfaith community in New York.
And 1 year of working together led to 15 years of friendship and collaboration.
To find us sitting here today, embarking on a new project.
Whether you are part of an interfaith family,
or you're exploring and interested in how different faiths interact with one another,
this is the space for you.
Subscribe to guarantee you never miss an episode.
And help us spread the Torah and gospel of interfaith wisdom far and wide.
And you'll also gain access to exclusive content like our holiday live stream events.
We hope you enjoy every episode.
Listen at your own pace.
Share with a friend.
And don't forget to subscribe.
This episode, we are unpacking the myth of it won't work.
You can't be in an interfaith relationship and seriously call yourself a Christian.
For a full introduction to this episode, please check out part 1. And now, let's get to part 2. For this second part of our episode on the myth of it won't work, I wanted to bring in a story which it's not as much of a particular vignette, you could say, but more kind of like an overall experience of what it means to be interfaith and to decide with your partner that you want to hold both faith traditions together. We're going to be listening to Kate. If you've just joined us, we were introduced to Kate DeAngelis of the Interfaith Book Group in New York during the second part of myth number 1, Judaism and Christianity do not mix. They're too different. And what we're going to hear from Kate is really kind of a synopsis of how she thinks, like, yeah, it can work because we've seen it work. So here is Kate.
Yeah, I'm sure this has been said before, but add in how like confusing the kids or it doesn't work or you can't do both, they don't mix. Like, I think I was hearing Yvette's story about, her wedding a bit and how we've all shared documents of here's our proposed outline of how this could work or how we would envision our ceremonies working, and having multiple clergy present in important religious ceremonies and getting away with having a baptism and a bris or a baby naming ceremony and a baptism. We've seen it work. We've done it. We've gotten the proper approvals. We've worked hard and tried to negotiate, but we're not breaking any rules. We're just making it modern and growing each religion, I think, respectively. And it's really beautiful what we can do, and saying that it'll confuse the kids. Like, sure, maybe, but also they could also have this fully enriched, like, I feel like I've grown so much and learned so much, and I have these new holidays that I can celebrate and have meaning and traditions of slowing down on Fridays and lighting candles and making challah, and who doesn't love bread and candles, So it feels really special, and to be able to be connected to families and have these traditions and our community too, to have such an enriching community where we've been so vulnerable, and, we were complete strangers, but we got very personal very quickly because we're dealing with these very personal issues. And it was a great way to make close friends and to have a great community, which is what religion is all about.
So that's a relatively short story, but I really liked it because even in just that short little bit, Kate was very concise in how she was saying that we have all of these experiences in our lives that we've already done, we've already accomplished, and that we can already see by virtue of the relationships that we have formed in this particular group that she is a part of. She's a part of the Interfaith book group in New York, who can really be together with her and with her husband as they continue to find ways to make it work. So I think that that's just a really wonderful way of kind of summarizing the whole larger point that we're trying to make here. And at the same time, I think that there were a couple of major moments in what she shared that I want to raise up and focus on a little bit for our conversation, Anna, like as we're debriefing. So the first is the sense of how Kate is making new holidays, is gaining new traditions, that she is slowing down on Fridays. And who doesn't love making bread? I mean, challah is delicious and everyone can understand that. And now it's almost like a part of her. You know, we've had this discussion a little bit about the extent to which someone from another faith tradition could take on the traditions of the other one and the extent to which they feel a connection to it. We talked about that in regards to, in one of the previous episodes, about how can a Jew feel connected to Easter. For Kate, gaining a new tradition that she can share with her husband is something absolutely beautiful. And I also think it's fascinating, the notion that, as she put it, that we're not breaking any rules. I'm sure there are some folks who might disagree with that, but I also think that it's the way that she put it was so beautiful in the sense of we're just making the religions more modern, right? We're bringing it into this interfaith world that we're living in, this diverse world that we are a part of. And it reminds me of a teaching actually from the Talmud. So again, for our listeners, the Talmud is a collection of rabbinic teachings that was collected over the course of about 6 centuries or so. It came out around the same time as long time. But it came out around the same time as the New Testament did in Christianity. Some might argue that what the New Testament was for Christians, the Talmud was for Jews, in the sense of helping to develop a certain kind of perspective that formed the foundation of that particular religious faith. And in the Talmud, there is a specific part of the Talmud known as Masechet Megillah, or the tractate, the collection of teachings related to the story of Esther. So there's a really fascinating question that revolves around Mordechai. So Mordechai, who is related to Esther, we don't exactly know how, whether he's an uncle, father, husband, brother, we don't really know. But we do know that he comes from the tribe of Benjamin. And yet he is referred to in the Megillah, in the scroll of Esther, as Ish Yehudi, which is translated as a Jewish man or a Judean. Now, a Judean, meaning comes from the tribe of Judah, doesn't necessarily mean that he was Jewish. Or to put another way, that at a certain point in time, the term Jewish became the term to encapsulate all people who descend from the 12 tribes of Israel. But prior to that point in time, they were identified by their tribe. So in Masechet Megillah, which if anyone is wanting to check the reference, it's on Daf 13a, page 13a. Rabbi Yochanan said that Mordechai came from the tribe of Benjamin. Why then was he referred to as a Yehudi, as a Judean, or perhaps in this case as a Jew? Because it seems that the term Jew and Judean were changing around the time that the scroll of Esther was coming out. So why was he referred to as a Yehudi? On account of the fact that he repudiated idol worship. For anyone who repudiates idolatry is called a Yehudi. Now, if it's talking about a Judean, okay, whatever. But if it's talking about a Jew, meaning that anyone who says that idolatry is wrong, that there are these false gods out there and there's only one God to whom we serve, that person is called a Jew. I mean, that's a pretty incredible statement.
Wow. Audience, I know that you're only hearing our reactions right now, but boy, if you could see my face.
Yes.
I believe the best descriptive term is that I am aghast. And so appreciative that you have brought this Talmudic reading and interpretation into this conversation. I'm processing live, and I'm so excited to
It is so cool to watch you process this live.
Yes. And I'm excited because I feel excited because it's opening my mind up. I do have a lot of thoughts, and this theological, like academic nerd in me wants to go on and on and on tonight with you about this. You opened up your debrief, and I was thinking about the same things, the same points that you raised in Kate's sharing and what we heard from Kate, and what you raised about making things more modern in her perspective, that no one is breaking the rules by being interfaith. Those were the two things that stood out to me as well. And then you brought in the Talmud, and immediately I thought, hey, folks in our audience from a Christian background, I feel compelled to remind folks, and I'm so glad you made the connection, that the timing of when the Talmud was being written essentially aligns historically with what is believed to also be when many of the New Testament books were also written, because there are a lot of Christians who wind up with a notion of, well, the Old Testament or the Hebrew Testament stops, therefore Judaism stops. And then the New Testament begins, the gospel stories begin, Christianity begins, and there is oftentimes just a total ignorance because most Christians are not taught enough about Judaism to know that there is a thing called the Talmud, and that Judaism didn't stop.
No.
It hasn't stopped throughout history. And then to also remind our Christian audience, Christianity also changed quite a bit. And so Kate's emphasis on kind of saying, we're not really doing anything wrong. We're not breaking rules. We're making the expression of these two faiths modern is just very apt. There's this nugget of truth in what she said that, for myself and the background of theological study and the conversations that you and I have had together, and the numerous interactions with interfaith families, have just underscored this point, that the history of both of these traditions has been continual change and progress, modernization, figuring out how to make it work in the face of all sorts of different challenges, changes, conflict, contexts, et cetera, et cetera.
And what I think is so interesting about that progress over time is that we not only had this vision of these two faiths kind of diverging at one point in time, and then yes, brothers and sisters at one point, but then kind of go off and do our own thing, and in many ways are in conflict with one another. But what this teaching from the Talmud expresses, and the reason why I found it so interesting and related to what Kate was saying, is because certain identifying characteristics of practice and perhaps even of belief can identify oneself with a particular faith in a way in which you may not be a practitioner of that faith, but that you do those practices, you have certain beliefs that make you connected in some way, right? That Mordechai is called a Yehudi, as if to say, if anyone goes against idolatry, if anyone says no to idolatry, then you're kind of like a Jew. And there are many other examples actually from around that time period in which we hear Christians in Egypt and in other areas in the Middle East in which they were practicing certain rituals that one would connect with Judaism, like lighting candles and challah and all these different things, meaning that these rituals are being used in many ways by folks who are exposed to them and see benefit in them. And so the notion of it won't work is that you can't find a way for, as a family unit, there is this strong tradition of being able to use the different kind of teachings, the different kinds of experiences that are part of the other tradition as part of yours within the context of your own home.
Right. And to enrich your life by falling in love with not just your partner, but the rituals and tradition that they come from.
Can I tell you one of my favorite stories, which is related because we're recording this during the holiday of Hanukkah? It's the story of the dreidel. The dreidel is considered to be an item that was used during the Maccabean revolt. That story is just not true. The Maccabean revolt is true. That happened. But the story of that there is this dreidel. So a dreidel is a spinning top. And the way that the story is taught is that people were studying Torah, were studying Jewish texts. And when the Greeks were coming to check to make sure that Jews were not doing Jewish things, they would take out this dreidel and they would play it together. That way they could hide what it is that they were studying. That's not true. As much as I love that story, it's just not true. The dreidel itself is actually a top that comes from medieval Germany. And in particular, it was a common game for kids to play during the cold holiday season, probably with a tree in the home, because fir trees often came from Germany or from that area of the world. And these kids would be playing a game of, don't know exactly what it would have been called there, but it was a game in which you had a spinning top that had 4 letters on it. The first letter, which is an N sounding letter, begins a German word meaning none or nothing, meaning that when you spin it and it lands on it, then you don't get anything that's in the pot because you have a pot full of money or whatever it is, right? You don't get any of that pot if it rolls on the end. And then if you spin it and then it lands on the G letter, which in German is ganz, it means you get everything. You get the whole pot. And if it lands on the H sounding letter, it stands for halb. It means you get half of it.
Yes.
And then if it lands on the S one, it's, I think, sin or sign or something like that, which means you put some things in. Meaning all of those letters represent the different rules for the actual game of this spinning top. So that top found its way into the practice of Jews who were around that time, took the same sounding letters, turned them into Hebrew. The Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin used the same rules. If you landed on a Nun, you got nothing. If you landed on a Gimel for the G one, you got it all those different things.
Yeah.
And played that game. And the reason they played that game was because everyone was doing that game during the holiday season when it was cold outside. Right? But the fascinating thing about all that is, yes, they took this game, but they found a way to make it Jewish, which is why those letters actually then correspond to a phrase related to the story of Hanukkah, Nes Gadol Haya Sham, meaning a great miracle happened there. A great miracle happened in Israel where God saved the Jews through the Maccabees in their fight against the Greeks.
So the story of the dreidel is a story of how people can say,
we are taking this game and finding a way to make it our own. And that is part of what this is all about, right? That you take these traditions that are now being brought into the home by one or the other, and you're making it part of who you are. You're holding them together because you're not trying to do something, not trying to make a whole new thing, but you're holding them together in a way that honors both of those traditions and what it means, but now it is shared. Now it's a part of you. That even if you're Christian, you can find a connection to challah making and have the rest on Shabbat. And if you're Jewish, you can find a connection to Christmas and to Easter and to all of these holidays and feel like it's a part of you because it's a part of this embodied family unit, which, as we've said, that's what's so amazing about the interfaith relationship and interfaith dialogue that is an interfaith family.
Yes.
So I just went on there for a long time.
I am enraptured. And if I may put out on the table everything that you just described, the importance of this conversation, this topic, unpacking this myth, human beings as a part of creation stand apart from other animals, other beings that were also made. I'm going to argue, yeah, free will, but look at us being innovative. Look at us being creative. Look at us having to make sense of our world, our existence, our circumstances in so many myriad beautiful ways throughout history over the course of time. We are not just animals. We are set apart for a different purpose. And if part of the Imago Dei is our ability to innovate and experience the world differently than other parts of creation, then can't we be okay with interfaith families learning and growing, loving and enriching their own and each other's lives and not be so upset about it?
Yeah, there doesn't need to be this sort of imaginary border of you cannot move beyond this place. There's always borrowing. There's always learning and growing and experiencing new things and then integrating. I mean, religion in many ways is one of the most amazing creations that human beings have done, right? It comes from that spark based off of stories that are passed down, that are integrated and ingrained within us, but it's a human creation. It's a human creation that we do with that spark of God to create and innovate and make happen. And it looks different in every generation, which I think comes back to Kate's point about making it modern.
Yeah. Christianity today does not look like the Christianity that is described in any of the New Testament books, whether the Gospels or the additional writings. Judaism does not look today like it would have looked as Moses was coming down off of Mount Sinai or at any other point in time.
Right.
History has emerged. And to the extent that both of our traditions have messianic beliefs, history is still going. We're not at the end yet, and we don't get to determine what the end is either. So why are we sometimes approaching these conversations like as if there is an endpoint that we've already reached? I'm not done growing.
Yeah, I'm not done growing either.
And for as many of us are having children, they are definitely not done growing.
There's so much more. There's so much more life. There's so much more life to be unpacked. By the way, you brought up the messianic point that kind of history is still unfolding. One of my favorite jokes is someone who was asking a rabbi and a minister, are you guys okay with the fact that you have different messianic beliefs? He said, yeah, no big deal. I said, why not? I said, well, for one, it'll be the first time. And for the other, it'll be the second time.
And for both of us, then it'll be the last time. All right,
that was a great way to end the story. And I hope that everyone liked that rabbi joke right now. All right.
There's dad jokes, there's rabbi jokes.
There's minister jokes. There's all kinds of jokes. All right. And now we'll move on to Anna's story.
Ari, I've got a story for you.
Oh, another story. That happens with this thing, this podcast thing that we're doing.
This thing that we do like week after week.
All right. So
yes,
what's your next story?
My next story for our topic of It Won't Work is coming from the conversation that I had with Susan Katz-Miller.
We originally met Susan Katz-Miller, author of Being Both, Embracing Two Religions in One Interfaith Family, in Myth Number 2, Part 2. So you're Jews for Jesus, right?
So, quick aside by way of introducing her, this portion of our conversation actually has to do with divorce.
Oh, lovely.
Right? So,
yeah,
we went there.
We got to go there.
It's a part of life. Then.
Especially if we're talking about the topic of It Won't Work. Divorce is very much front and center of that.
So, without further ado, I will let you listen and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Do you have any kind of like headline other than divorce?
No. I think that's the primer. We're going to leave it at that.
We're going to leave it at that. All right. So here is Susan Katz Miller.
Personally, I feel that I have more experience with interfaith families than probably anybody in the world because I'm born into it, because I spent the time surveying and interviewing hundreds of people on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, I have coached couples for the past 10 years. And I will say that I believe that the families who ally themselves, who get involved with interfaith family communities, are particularly strong in their marriages because they are dealing with these issues. They're facing it. They're talking through it. They're often talking through it before they get married. They're forced by the fact that they are an interfaith couple to talk about these issues. And that opens up communication. It means they're doing that deep communication that bodes well for any relationship. And so I think it's almost a protective effect that being an interfaith couple forces you to do that deep communication, and that benefits your relationship. All of that said, if you have a fundamentalist form of religion, whether it's Jewish or Christian or Muslim or anything else, that is exclusivist and that takes the attitude that your religious practice is the only right way, then that does not bode well for being in a relationship with anybody who has a different belief system. It's not even necessarily about the difference in religious category or identity. So you're going to have the same problems if you have somebody who's a fire and brimstone evangelical dating a mainline Protestant, or somebody who's an Orthodox Jew who falls in love with someone who's a Reformed Jew. They're going to have a lot of things they need to work out. The same thing can happen in Islam. The same thing can happen with any religion, really.
So the first part of the conversation right before you started to hear Sue's voice, we had specifically reflected on a book that had come out sometime in the early 2000s, essentially saying that interfaith marriages are doomed for divorce based on some statistic about the abnormally high rates of divorce among interfaith families. And so Sue had also shared some thoughts about be careful whenever you're reading books and or statistics, look at the source, understand where they're coming from and why certain people might be pushing a narrative.
They're trying to make a point here.
Right. And the point of that book, and that might also be true in other studies that are out there, is essentially scaring people away from interfaith marriages because there's going to be all these problems. And so the part of the story that we heard and what I thought was so compelling was, Sue giving her credentials about how long and how intently she has been doing this work.
Right.
And being able to say with confidence, I've spoken to so many families, worked with so many couples, et cetera, that moment where she says there's actually a protective effect of people who really take seriously their partner's faith background as well as their own in a particular way that strengthens the marriage.
Right.
And that approach is also something that she's essentially encouraging any and every other couple to do, especially if you find yourself coming together with someone of a different background than your own, especially in the theological, religious, cultural realm.
So the takeaway is, you want a stronger marriage, marry somebody of a different faith tradition, but only if you're actually willing to talk about it. And I think that is an important piece of what Sue was saying, at least that I was hearing, that because you have to go deep due to the fact that it's a conversation that needs to happen, it provides this protective effect. But if you don't talk about it, because the relationship wasn't built upon that shared understanding of each other's faith traditions. It kind of only comes up later on. Then it might have that different effect, maybe a corrosive effect. Hence what some of the other literature out there says about interfaith marriages, that it would lead to a couple breaking up. In thinking more about this topic of whether or not interfaith identity provides a protective or corrosive effect to the sustainability of marriage, I'm also struck by a comment that was made to me by a colleague who has also worked a lot with interfaith families, has done a lot of counseling of interfaith families, trying to help couples navigate the differences of their faith traditions prior to marriage. She said that there are times when a couple breaking up may actually be success. Not in the sense that, well, it's good that they broke up because how could their marriages work by having different faith traditions, but rather that this was actually the first time that they were able to go deep, that they were able to get into the conversation of how they would relate to each other's faith traditions. Some couples do not have that conversation prior to their engagement. And only once they have that conversation, they can actually decipher if this is what we thought it would be, and we are going to be able to navigate it. So for the same reason why a couple's conversations about their different faith traditions may lead to a protective effect, it might also lead to an effect where they realize it won't work. And as long as they're able to do that prior to the actual marriage itself, then, I think an argument could be made that there's value to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The value added of now each of these persons have a stronger sense of what's really important to them and why their faith background and traditions became something that they couldn't compromise on, right? That if it does lead to a couple breaking up, that it's in the service of the strengthening of that importance of their faith.
Right.
So as those two people are like choosing to break up, they're still moving forward in their own lives with a stronger sense of self,
right,
that they would carry forward in future relationships.
Mm-hmm. I'll get a little personal here. My very first real girlfriend was not Jewish. And the circumstances of it kind of funny because I was doing Model UN in high school, and it just so happened that the Model UN debate was going to happen on Shabbat. And so I had a long conversation with my parents about wanting to be able to do it. And my parents were hemming and hawing about allowing me to do it on Shabbat because I would have to travel, which in our family we did not do. And eventually my parents allowed me to be able to go. After that Model UN debate, met someone, started to date, and my mom was like, of course this happened. We let our son go to Model UN on Shabbat, and of course he comes back with a non-Jewish girlfriend. There were reasons why that was the right relationship for me to have at that time. But what I will say is that we were only dating for a short period of time when I started to feel that our different faith backgrounds was not something that I could be able to navigate. And what I realized then was that I wanted to only date somebody who was Jewish. And I actually think that by dating somebody who was not Jewish, I came to that realization. So there are different ways in which individuals decide for themselves to what extent does this person meet the kind of criteria for who my partner would be, whether it's for dating or whether it's for marriage or whatnot. And every couple goes through the ups and downs, and at different points of their lives decide that this is an important value or this is not an important value. I've met couples as well who have gotten divorced, and part of the reasons why they got divorced was because they didn't realize how much of the different faith traditions kind of manifested itself later on in life. So a lot of this is well about just that open communication and open realization, that sense of self, as you were mentioning, that one has about what are the values that are important to me. And perhaps being of the same faith tradition is important. Perhaps being of the same denomination, right? To the point that Sue was making, that if you marry somebody of a different Christian denomination or different Jewish denomination, it might as well be an intermarriage in terms of one's understanding of the role that faith has to play in your life. but that ultimately you want to have similar values and you want to be able to find a way to make it work. And as long as you're open to be able to make it work, you can do two faiths in the relationship. You can find a way. And to follow up on Sue's point, it can strengthen the relationship because it's something done relatively earlier on, or hopefully so.
Hopefully so. And certainly she has worked as a resource to do that deeper work, to ask the questions, to really sit with one another and themselves as individuals, to not shy away from the hard questions before making a big decision.
Right. To some degree, this conversation reminds me of one of our previous conversations regarding clergy, especially the willingness to make that leap, working with couples of different faith backgrounds for their weddings, for their marriages, and of the theological leap that clergy need to be able to make, saying that this is something that can and should work. The same, I think, needs to be done for the sake of the couple themselves, that they know that when they stand under the chuppah or in a church or in a structure, as we heard once before, or wherever it is that they may be, with whoever the clergy is standing in front of them, this is a moment in which they're taking serious the promises, vows, oaths, however they want to call it. And therefore, because they're taking it so seriously, their understanding of what the consequences are of it and of how the service itself is designed to help them create a foundation for what their future life is going to look like as a couple and as a family. Indeed.
And I was also reminded of one of our previous stories from the book group, the story about trying to help her family members kind of understand her partner. And she did touch upon the fact that there were also like intercultural differences, you know, with her family background, and then also having her Jewish partner and helping her family members kind of cross more than one bridge in understanding like different aspects of their relationship, helping her family members learn new things that were important to our partner.
Right.
And I'm also trying not to jump ahead because I know that we have some fantastic topics coming up in some of our future episodes that are really going to continue this thread, right? Those moments of, well, you can't be taking it seriously. No one can be taking their faith seriously if you're choosing to get intermarried. All the stories that we've heard, all so far, and the stories we're going to continue to hear are showcasing the depth and the length that people go to take their faith seriously and still be intermarried.
Yeah.
Like there's no apathy here. This is not any sort of impulsive, like, oh, you know, or flighty decision making. Everything that we've heard, all the people that we've shared stories with are very thoughtful, very intentional individuals.
Yeah.
For this conversation of around interfaith families and, you know, trying to rebut this myth of it won't work. And I feel like what you and I are saying and what we're hearing from our guests and our storytellers is, but when there's love, how can we be upset? We're putting more love out there into the world. And that's always a good thing.
Yep. Amen to that.
Thank you for listening to part 2 of episode 4, It Won't Work.
We hope you learned and laughed with us.
Subscribe to guarantee you never miss an episode.
And we want to thank our supporters and contributors, our families, and all of our featured storytellers.
We also want to give a special shout out to our composer and music producer, Pablo Lengain.
Subscribe, share, leave a review, and send us a message. We would love to hear your feedback and to learn more of your stories.
Find us on any of your podcast platforms to subscribe, and you can also find us on interfaithingpod.com.
Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
And if you really like what you hear, please consider supporting us financially at patreon.com/interfaithing.
So until we meet again, take care.
Stay curious.
And keep interfaithing.
Oh!